This happened in the fall of 2020, when I was living alone in a rented townhouse in southern Illinois. It was my first time ever living by myself. Even though I was technically an adult, 27, with a full-time job and a stable routine, I still had a lot of nerves about the idea. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, and I thought the silence and solitude might help me process everything. The townhouse was part of a small row of identical units, kind of plain but clean and quiet, tucked away in a sleepy cul-de-sac just off a rural highway. The neighborhood had that sterile suburban vibe, lots of beige vinyl siding, trimmed hedges, wind chimes, and mailboxes with family names stenciled on them. Mostly older folks, but a few young families. I didn't know any of my neighbors well, but I liked it that way. I kept to myself. Almost right away, I noticed one person who stood out from the rest. He lived 3 doors down, a tall, heavyset man, probably in his mid-40s, with a scruffy beard and a weird habit of standing outside his house at night, sometimes just pacing or smoking, sometimes doing nothing at all, just staring. I'd pull into my driveway after work around 9 or 10 p.m., and there he'd be, leaning against his porch rail or just standing at the edge of his driveway facing the street. He never waved, never smiled. He just stared. Even if I looked directly at him, I tried to ignore it. A couple of times, I mentioned it to friends or my mom, and they said maybe he was just a night owl or had insomnia. But there was something unsettling about him, like he was always watching but never participating. It wasn't just that he was there, it was the stillness. He didn't fidget, check his phone, or shift his weight. He just stood there like a statue. I told myself not to be paranoid, but the more time passed, the more that gnawing feeling in my gut grew. Then the noises started. It was around mid-September when I first heard it. I had just gotten home from work after a long shift. I worked late hours managing inventory at a distribution center, and I usually got in around 10:30 p.m., exhausted, grabbing a bite to eat and crashing. That night, I fell asleep around midnight, at exactly 2:37 a.m. I woke up to a sound I can only describe as metal scraping against wood. At first, I thought I had dreamed it, but then I heard it again, a long, slow creaking noise, like an old gate opening. My bedroom was on the first floor at the back of the unit, and I had a sliding glass door with vertical blinds that led to a small fenced-in backyard. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and listened. There was a pause. Then I heard footsteps, soft crunching sounds, like someone walking slowly across gravel. My entire backyard was lined with decorative rock instead of grass, so you could hear every footstep clearly. These weren't animal sounds. I grabbed my phone and crept out of bed. I didn't have a weapon, just a dull kitchen knife I kept in my nightstand just in case, which at the time felt kind of ridiculous. I crouched by the edge of the window and peeked through the blinds. I couldn't see anything. The motion light wasn't on, which meant either they were out of range or had come in a different way. I dialed 911. The dispatcher was calm, asked for my address, and told me officers were en route. I stayed crouched in the dark, barely breathing. About 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flickered through my front window. I got up, opened the door, and met the 2 officers outside. I explained everything, what I heard, what time it started. One of them walked around the back while the other stayed with me and asked a few questions. The officer in the yard came back and said the gate was closed, and there were no signs of tampering, but he said he'd write up a report just in case. They didn't see anyone, no footprints or damage, basically no crime. One of them actually said, probably just a raccoon, and gave me a look that clearly said, "You're wasting our time." I didn't argue. They left after about 10 minutes. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I went outside to check the backyard myself. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a flat stone about the size of a paperback book wedged under the bottom edge of the wooden fence gate. I hadn't noticed it before. The gate had a heavy spring that made it swing closed automatically, but the stone looked like it had been placed there specifically to stop it from closing all the way. It was subtle, like something someone would do if they wanted to come back later and slip in without making noise. I picked up the rock and tossed it across the yard. I called the police again and told them what I had found. They told me they'd noted in the report, but again said there wasn't much they could do. I asked if they could talk to any of the neighbors or check for cameras. They said no, unless a crime was committed, they couldn't investigate. I felt like I was losing my mind. 2 nights later, it escalated. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke up again, this time to the sound of my back door handle turning. The handle rattled gently at first, like someone testing it, then a harder jiggle, like someone trying to open it. I sat up in bed, heart hammering. I couldn't see anything through the blinds, but I could feel someone standing on the other side. My mouth went dry. I picked up my phone with shaking hands and called the police again. While I waited, I crouched in the hallway out of view. I didn't have a gun or a dog, just that stupid kitchen knife. My motion light clicked on, and through a tiny gap in the blinds, I saw a shadow move across the window. It was a man. He didn't run or try to hide. He just stood there. The same 2 officers showed up again. This time they actually found footprints in the gravel, big ones heading right up to the door. But again, they said since no entry had been made, there wasn't enough to go on. They promised to patrol the area more often and told me to keep my doors locked. The next day, I installed a camera. It was one of those mid-range Wi-Fi security cams. I set one up above the back door and another above the front porch. That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat in the living room with the lights off, watching the live feed on my phone. 2:14 a.m. came and went. Nothing happened. Then at 2:23, the back camera triggered. A man stepped into frame. He walked in through the gate like he knew exactly how to move to avoid the motion sensor until the last second. He was tall and broad, wearing a black hoodie with the hood up, jeans, and gloves. He walked up to the door, looked up directly at the camera, and smiled, a slow, stretched-out grin. Then he backed up, still staring, and disappeared into the dark. I called the police again, and they came back, watched the clip, and admitted that yes, it was unsettling. But since he didn't break in, didn't damage property, and didn't appear to be armed, there was still allegedly nothing they could do. They wouldn't even ask the guy down the street to check his doorbell cam. I begged them. They said their hands were tied. That night I packed a bag and slept at a hotel. When I came back the next day, I found 4 muddy handprints on the glass door, 2 high up and 2 low, like someone had crouched down and just rested their hands there for a while, staring in. I moved out a week later. I broke my lease and forfeited my deposit. I didn't care. I couldn't stay there another night. The final straw was the note I found wedged in my mailbox the day I left. It was handwritten in small, cramped letters on lined notebook paper. It said, "The cops leave, but I don't." I filed one last report. The officer I spoke to that time looked genuinely disturbed by the note. He promised they'd do a wellness check on the neighborhood, but it was too late. I never went back. About a month later, I got a message on Facebook from a girl named Kayla. She said she was the new tenant who had moved into the unit after me. Her message said, "Hi, sorry to bother you. I think you used to live here. Did you ever have someone in a black hoodie hanging around the backyard? I keep hearing footsteps at night, and last night someone knocked on the glass door around 2 a.m. and just stood there." I didn't reply. I didn't want to know what happened next. This happened in 2020 when I was assigned to clear out a property in a rural part of upstate New York. It was one of those dying places, only one gas station. Half the businesses shuttered, roads cracked and overgrown. The house itself was a small one-story place off a dirt road, surrounded by overgrown brush and woods on 3 sides. No other homes nearby, just trees and silence. According to the file, the house had been foreclosed after the owner, an elderly woman, passed away, and no heirs had stepped forward to claim the estate. The utilities had been shut off for over a year. Our job was to catalog any remaining property, empty it out, and secure it for winter. I drove up on a Monday morning around 9 a.m. with a small box truck and all my gear. From the outside, the house looked intact, windows closed, door locked, roof fine, just a lot of weeds and vines climbing up the porch. I had to shove the front door open because it had swollen in the frame. But once inside, everything looked pretty standard: dusty, stale air, and faded furniture. Then my work phone rang. It startled me because I had no signal out there. I'd already checked and noticed I had no bars, but the phone buzzed anyway. There was no number on the caller ID, it just said unknown caller. I answered, and there was nothing, just a low crackling sound like static. I said hello twice, then hung up, chalking it up to a glitch. I got to work. I always start with photos documenting every room, every item. The living room was cluttered with old furniture, lace curtains, some framed paintings. It reminded me of my grandma's house. Heavy furniture, doilies, porcelain figures. The hallway had a smell, not rot, more like mildew and dust, and something faintly metallic. There were 3 bedrooms. One had been stripped bare except for a sagging mattress on the floor. Another was clearly a sewing room with thread spools everywhere and a dusty machine on the desk. I took a closer look, and there was a corkboard filled with old newspaper clippings, mostly obituaries, dozens of them, all clipped out with scissors and pinned carefully to the board. No names I recognized, all local. I moved on. In the master bedroom, There was a rotary phone on the nightstand. I remember stopping and staring at it for a second because I hadn't seen one in years. It was off-white, yellowed with age, with a long coiled cord. The kind of phone that would never ring again because the line had been cut long ago. I moved on to the bathroom. That's when my phone rang again. It said unknown caller again. This time I hesitated. I picked it up, stepped out into the hallway, and answered again. Nothing. But this time, after about 5 seconds, I heard a whisper, very soft, so quiet I could barely make it out. It said, "Don't answer the phone in the bedroom." Then the line went dead. I stood there frozen, heart pounding. The house was dead silent. I checked the windows, all closed. Nobody was outside, and there was no sign of forced entry. My first thought was that someone had pranked me. It's what anyone would think. Maybe one of the other crew guys was messing with me, but no one else knew I was there that early. And again, I had no signal. I checked my phone 1 bar, then nothing, like it flickered in and out of existence. I tried calling my supervisor, but the call failed. I decided to finish the job quickly. I started boxing up loose items in the living room, books, figurines, dusty glassware. But the whole time I felt off, like I was being watched. I kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see someone standing there. Then the phone rang a 3rd time. But not my phone, the rotary phone in the bedroom. I heard it from across the house, a shrill mechanical ring that echoed through the rooms. That phone should have been dead. The line was disconnected, no dial tone, no service. But yet, it rang like an old-fashioned bell. I walked slowly down the hallway toward the bedroom, phone still in my hand. It rang again and again. I stepped into the doorway. The phone sat on the nightstand, the receiver trembling slightly with each ring. There was no chance I was picking up that phone. The rings eventually stopped. I backed out of the room. I wanted to leave, but part of my job was securing the property, and I still had to check the basement. I almost said screw it, but something made me keep going. Maybe pride. Maybe I just didn't want to admit how scared I was. The basement door was in the kitchen. I opened it slowly. The stairs creaked as I stepped down, flashlight in hand. I smelled mold and something like rust. There were shelves along the wall filled with old paint cans and some broken furniture. In the back corner, there was a small table. On it, a cordless phone, a newer model, gray plastic, covered in dust, and next to it, a stack of yellowed notebooks. I picked one up and flipped through it. Each page had a name, a date, and a short sentence. Lena Sh, July 3, 2019, rang once, didn't answer. Carl M, September 12, 2019. Picked up, warned him. It went on like this, dozens of entries. I dropped the notebook, and my heart felt like it completely dropped out of my body as I looked around the basement, fearing I wasn't alone down there and that someone was watching me from any corner in the darkness. I rushed back up the stairs, looking behind me the whole time, heart in my throat. I didn't finish the job. I drove straight back to the office and turned in my report. I didn't tell them everything. I just said the property was unsafe and possibly had squatters or interference. They reassigned the job to another crew. 2 days later, I got a text from one of the other guys, Mark. He'd gone out there that morning to finish the job. I hadn't told him specifically what happened. His message said, "The phone in the bedroom with no service rang while I was in there." What the hell? I called his work cell phone immediately, and he told me he didn't answer the phone in the house because he was too freaked out. The next day, Mark apparently quit without notice and never returned to work. He's not dead or anything. I admittedly looked him up on Facebook eventually, and he posted stuff since then. But I never spoke to him again. I don't know what else he saw in the house, but it must have been something bad enough for him to want to distance himself from this job. My boss did call the police to report the potential squatters after Mark quit, but they found nobody inside the house. Everything about that house, from its location to its eerie, dilapidated interior to the phone calls to my cell phone and that voice on the line and that damn house phone ringing. It's like I found myself in a legitimate horror movie. I swear it had to be one of two things: an elaborate sick prank or an equally elaborate trap. This happened in 2019. I was in my late 20s, living alone in a rental house in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. It wasn't a fancy place, just an older one-story house with creaky floors, thin walls, and a small backyard. But it was cheap, and it came with a basement, which I used to store extra furniture, tools, and stuff. I moved in that spring, and for the first few months, nothing strange happened. The house had its quirks. Some pipes rattled when you turned on the shower, and there was this one kitchen cabinet that always swung open on its own, but nothing unusual for a place that old. The only part I didn't like was the basement. The door was in the hallway next to the bathroom. It was heavy and stuck a little when you opened it, and the light switch for the basement was actually halfway down the stairs, which meant you had to walk down a few steps in total darkness before you could reach it. The first time I went down there, I honestly felt weird. Not scared exactly, but uneasy. The single bulb didn't do much to light the corners, and the whole place smelled like old wood. But I didn't have any reason to be down there for long, so I stored my things, shut the door, and didn't think much of it. That changed around late October. I had just gotten home from work. I'm a night shift security guard, so I usually get home around 3 a.m. I was heading to the bathroom before bed when I heard something, a faint knock, 3 soft taps. It came from behind the basement door. I froze in place. At first, I thought maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was the pipes or the house settling. But as I stood there holding my breath, I heard it again. 3 distinct knocks. I backed up a few steps and stared at the door. Then I waited. There was just silence now. I remember whispering to myself, "It's just the house." Even though I didn't really believe it, I didn't open the door. I went to my bedroom, locked the door, and stayed awake for the next 2 hours listening. Eventually, I fell asleep with the TV on. The next morning, I checked the basement. I opened the door, went down the stairs, and turned on the light. Everything was exactly the way I left it. No signs of anyone having been down there. No footprints in the dust, no broken windows. I convinced myself it had to be the house shifting, or maybe a small animal that got in somehow. I moved on. But a few nights later, it happened again. This time I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I heard the knock. Not 3 taps this time, just 1, but it was loud and it was close, like someone had used their knuckles hard against the basement door. I opened the bathroom door and looked. The basement door was closed. Nothing moved. The hallway was quiet. I walked over and put my ear against the wood. At first, I heard nothing, but then, very faint, I heard what sounded like breathing, slow, steady, as if someone was standing on the other side waiting. I backed away and went to my room again, locking the door. I called my landlord. I told him something strange was going on in the basement, that I thought someone had maybe gotten into the house somehow. He seemed skeptical but said he'd come by to check it out. When he arrived in the morning, we both went down into the basement together. He looked around, checked the windows, the walls, even the foundation. Nothing was damaged or broken. No signs of a break, in or animals. I didn't say anything. I couldn't explain what I was hearing, and I didn't want to sound crazy. For the next week, things were quiet. I started to think that maybe I was just overtired or imagining things. I was working too much, after all. But then one night around 2 a.m., I was sitting on my couch watching TV when I heard the basement door creak. Not a knock or a slam, but a creak like it was slowly swinging open. I sat up straight and turned off the volume. I could hear it, a slow, grinding creak of the hinges moving. I got up and peeked down the hallway, and the basement door was wide open. I hadn't opened it in over a week. I hadn't even touched it. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly walked toward it. I didn't have a weapon, but I had no choice. I had to know what was going on. I stood at the top of the stairs and shined the light down. The basement was pitch black. The bulb wasn't on. I reached around the corner and flicked the switch. Nothing. It was dead. The bulb must have burned out. That's when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. They weren't rushing, they were slow, but they were 100% footsteps. I backed away. My hands were shaking. I slammed the door shut and held the handle tight. For a moment, I felt the pressure of something on the other side, like it was leaning against the door. Then it stopped. I locked the door and called the police. I told them someone was in my basement. They showed up about 10 minutes later, and 2 officers cleared the house and went down into the basement. I stood in the front yard waiting, and after what felt like forever, they came back up. They said they didn't find anyone, no signs of forced entry or anyone hiding, nothing even disturbed. One of them even tried to laugh it off, asking if I'd been watching scary movies. I knew what I heard. After they left, I didn't go back inside right away. I just stood there staring at that house. Finally, I went back in, locked every door and window, and stayed up until the sun came up. That morning, I bought a padlock and installed it on the basement door. I didn't care if it was allowed or not. I needed it. For the next month, the basement stayed quiet, no sounds, no knocks, nothing. I almost let myself relax. Then one night, I got home from work and noticed the basement door was open, not just unlocked. The padlock was lying on the floor, broken. The door itself was slightly ajar. I hadn't touched that door in weeks. I stood there staring at it. For the first time, I realized something every time this had happened, every noise, every knock. It had always happened at night when I was alone. I did not go down. I couldn't. I packed a bag, left the house, and stayed at a friend's place for a few days. When I came back, I literally nailed the basement door shut. I even wedged a chair against the door. I didn't care if the landlord got mad. I just couldn't look at that door anymore. A few nights later, around 3 a.m., I was lying in bed when I heard a sound that I still can't explain. It was a voice, not loud, not even someone speaking, but like the barely audible rumble of someone's vocal cords. It came from somewhere beneath the floorboards, directly under my bed. That was it. I called the police again. They showed up, did their search, and nothing turned up again, so I packed everything, minus the stuff in the basement, and I left. I didn't even wait for the lease to end. I don't know what was in that basement. I don't want to know. All I can say is that sometimes when I lie awake at night in my new apartment, I think about all this, and I wonder, if I'd waited just a little longer, what would have come up those steps? I once met this dude named Matt when I was out with friends at a bar one summer. I was out with a big group, and Matt and I made friends at the bar, vibing over the Cubs game that was on. My group kind of dispersed away from me as I spoke with Matt. So, it wasn't like Matt really spoke to any of my friends. We ended up exchanging Instagrams, and he had a decent amount of followers on Instagram. His pictures made him seem like a normal 20-something-year-old dude who likes to go out, travel, and stay active. After we exchanged info, I went to find my group. Honestly, whenever you burr out with another guy while you're at a bar, the odds of ever actually contacting each other again after exchanging info are slim to none. You always act like you'll hit them up, but come the next day when you're sober, you just have no interest. Well, the next day, which was a Saturday, I went out to another bar restaurant with my friends. This was an outdoor spot on the water. It was for my friend Tyler's birthday. I put something on my Instagram story as we all sang at the bar for him. After about an hour, we were done with dinner and just hanging around the outside section of the bar when I got a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and it was Matt. He dabbed me up with a smile and said this was his favorite Saturday night spot. I introduced Matt more officially to my friends this time, saying, "You guys remember Matt?" Even if they hadn't really spoken to him, they did see him the night before. Well, as the night went on, Matt kind of hung around for a while, and it was fine because everyone was drunk, including him, and everyone was just having a good time. The next time I saw Matt was when he invited me golfing on a hot day. Honestly, I suck at golfing, but it's something I want to get better at. So, when he invited me early one Sunday morning, I went. I think it was literally the following weekend after I saw him last. It was just him and me going. I tried to get a couple of my friends to go, but they were too hungover and said it was too early. Matt and I just vibed playing golf. I think it was only 9 holes. It took us like 2 hours. Afterwards we got food, and then I went home to relax before work the next day. I saw Matt one more time out after that before he invited me on a hiking trip with him to Arizona. Honestly, Arizona and the Grand Canyon were always on my bucket list. I just checked the dates with work and confirmed I was able to go first. And I was an immediate yes. I asked Tyler and a couple of other friends to come with, but they were heavy no's. They said they couldn't get the time off work and needed to save money. The typical responses from any of my friends when I try to get them on a trip. I asked Matt if any of his boys were going, and he said nah, he was going solo, dude. I actually hadn't met any of Matt's friends yet. His Instagram painted him as this super popular guy though, so I didn't find it weird. We flew out on August 15th, and our return flights to Chicago were August 18th. We landed at night. Matt rented a car for the weekend, and on the way to the Airbnb, we stopped for food and alcohol. By the time we got to the Airbnb, it was late. We had a couple of beers when we got there, and I could tell that Matt was down to stay up longer. But I was admittedly shot and wanted to go to sleep. This was when I realized there was only one bed in the Airbnb. I had never asked him to confirm that there were 2 bedrooms. When I brought it up, he pointed to the couch I was sitting on and said, "It's a pull-out couch." He then said relax and that he's not going to charge me for the Airbnb. Honestly, a free stay in Arizona, I couldn't complain about the couch. I pulled out the sofa bed, set up the sheets, and went to sleep. It was surprisingly comfortable. In the middle of the night, I woke up to Matt walking through the living room to the kitchen to get water. I'm a light sleeper. The sound of a pin dropping will make me wake up. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, Matt woke me up early. It was a sunny, gorgeous day, and we drove straight to the Grand Canyon. I had no idea just how massive it truly was or how many individual trail options there were. We hiked the Bright Angel. I think I didn't realize how out of shape I was until that day. Matt was perfectly fine, laughing and telling me to keep up while I was dripping in sweat and out of breath. We took numerous breaks, which we used to take a million amazing pictures. It was beautiful. Eventually, we got back to the car. We had been hiking for over 2 to 3 hours, and I needed food. We stopped by a deli on the way back. It was a long drive back to Phoenix, and when we got there, we took a midday nap, and then after that, we explored around Phoenix. And of course, in Matt fashion, we drank at multiple bars. I barely knew the guy, but I could already see he liked his alcohol. Fast forward, we got really drunk, but I think I got drunker, and I'm not sure how because Matt was downing as many drinks as me. We had to leave the rental on the street and Uber back to the Airbnb. It was late, time flew by somehow. I don't remember much besides Matt blasting music in the Airbnb for a bit and my plugging my phone in next to the couch. I guess I just went to sleep after that. That night, I woke up randomly, probably a couple of hours after I fell asleep. My bladder was about to explode, and my mouth was drier than the Grand Canyon. I got off the couch and headed toward the bathroom, but I heard something. A crack in the floor, like a crack from pressure. I scanned around the dark room with my eyes and saw nothing, so I went to the bathroom. While I was in there midstream, I heard a door clicking shut. It had to be Matt's bedroom door. When I finished peeing, I went to try Matt's door, but it was locked. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Whatever. I went back to the couch and fell back asleep pretty easily. The next morning, I woke up at like 8 a.m., head throbbing. The first thing I noticed was my phone. It was in a weird position. I had it charging last night and left it lying on the floor next to the couch bed. But now it was sitting on the table next to the couch, and it was unplugged. I was questioning why I might have done this, but ultimately, my answer was simple. I was just super drunk. That day, we obviously didn't do any hiking, otherwise I would have puked. We just Ubered to the car and then did some driving around, exploring different neighborhoods, scenery, and checking out the botanical gardens. I didn't really want to drink that day, but later on Matt convinced me. And wouldn't you know it, it was another night of getting really drunk. Our flight was at like 1 p.m. the following day, so at least we didn't have to worry about getting up really early. We got back to the Airbnb late again. I'd say between 1 and 2 a.m. this time. Matt insisted on letting me sleep in the bed that night just because it was fair. Honestly, I didn't argue. I eventually took my bag to his room and then said goodnight and shut the door. I didn't lock it. Not that it mattered because the locks, from what I remembered, had those doorknobs with locks that you could easily unlock with, like a butter knife or something. I wish I could say the story ended there and that we went home in peace the next day. Well, I woke up that night, probably not long after I fell asleep. I didn't know what woke me up at first. It's like waking up to a sound. But you didn't fully consciously hear that sound because you were still technically asleep when it caused you to wake up. I looked around the room and then for my phone. My phone was missing. I had it plugged in next to the bed and had the phone on the bed next to me. But now the cord was just dangling from the outlet to the ground with no phone. How could this happen again? I looked on one side of the bed on the floor and then the other, and I jumped up and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw Matt lying face down, sprawled out on that side of the bed on the floor. He looked up, looking like he had just woken up from a deep sleep. I shouted, "What are you doing?" He looked around the room, acting confused, like he didn't know how he got there. He stood up and said that he must have been so blacked out that he just walked in here to go to bed, but then remembered I was in the bed and he crashed on the floor. But that didn't make sense because he was on the side of the bed farther from the door. I then accused him of taking my phone, and he played dumb. He said I should check under the bed. Maybe it fell. Then he got on his knees, looked under the bed, and instantly said, "Bro, here it is." And he pulled it out from under the bed. I looked at him, and I genuinely felt like I was staring at a different person now. Who was this guy? Did he really try getting into my phone twice? I told him I'd just go back to the couch, but he insisted he would, and then he left the room. You bet your ass I locked the door this time. If it weren't for the phone, sure, I just see it as he was really drunk and did something goofy, like come pass out on the floor. But I was detecting something there. He took my phone and I know it. Since I was still kind of drunk, I didn't really have much trouble falling back asleep. Once again, I wish it ended there. But it didn't. I woke up one more time that night, and this time I quickly realized why. At the foot of my bed was Matt standing there, but all I could really see was his silhouette. For some reason, I didn't jump or scream this time. He sat down on the bed and started rubbing my foot, and that's when I screamed at him to get out. He wouldn't move, so I had to physically push him off the bed and out the bedroom door. I started packing my clothes into my bag, and then quickly packed all my toiletries and whatever else I had packed. He didn't say a word. He sat upright on the couch, watching me like a creepy NPC the entire time. It was the most unsettling part. I called an Uber to the airport. I wasn't staying there another minute. He didn't try to stop me. I got to the airport just as the sun was starting to rise, and as hard as I tried to sleep, I couldn't. My mind was just racing. I waited there the entire time for the flight. I paid like $35 to change my seat so I wouldn't be next to Matt. I looked out the window the entire time the plane was boarding so I wouldn't have to make eye contact with him. I didn't tell any of my friends until later that day. I just needed time to process and digest everything. A couple of my friends said, "See? I told you he was weird," and pointed out that both times we ran into him he was alone. It got me also thinking that the only reason he ran into me at the outdoor bar was because he saw my Instagram story and probably came there. Actual stalker behavior. I blocked his number and Instagram. But before doing so, I went to one of his older Instagram posts where he was with friends. No one was tagged in the picture, but I looked at the comments, and there was one comment from a guy who looked like he was in the picture. I saw that Matt wasn't even following him or vice versa. I took it upon myself to DM the guy, asking if he was still friends with Matt. The guy responded back within 10 minutes, saying this guy's a freak. Run away. From there, he told me about his own experience, along with the other guys who used to be friends with him, who all had to cut him off. The guy untagged himself from Matt's photo, but he said he can't forcibly get him to take down the picture. He wasn't surprised at all when I told him what had happened in Arizona, and the guy's response was, "Guy should be in jail." It's crazy that I thought Matt was just a normal dude who was looking for a bro, but he ended up being a potentially dangerous predator. I still just want to know what he was trying to access on my phone. This happened last summer around mid-July. I was home from college for a few weeks, and I was just trying to enjoy the break before my next semester started. My name's Kyle, and I live in Maryland. I had been talking with my two closest friends, Jason and Marcus, about doing something together. Just the three of us, like we used to back in high school. We all go to different colleges now, so it's rare that we get time like this. We ended up planning a weekend beach trip to Ocean City. Jason's family owns a small beach house there that they don't use much, and he got permission for us to stay there for a few days. It was nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom place a couple of blocks off the sand, but it was perfect for what we needed. Just time to relax, party a bit, and catch up. We drove down on a Friday afternoon. The weather was hot, upper 80s with that heavy humid air that sticks to your skin. It smelled like sunscreen and salt water the second we got into town. We spent the day walking the boardwalk, messing around in some of the arcades, and people watching. The beach was packed with tourists, kids running around with beach balls, families with umbrellas and coolers, and lifeguards constantly yelling at people to move out of the restricted areas. Everything felt normal. It was just a fun summer day. Later, we went back to the house, grilled burgers, had a few drinks, and started playing drinking games. By midnight, we were drunk and bored, and someone, maybe Marcus, suggested we go back to the beach. There's something weirdly appealing about being near the ocean at night. The beach is almost completely empty. The air cools down, and there's just something peaceful about it. We didn't bring much with us, just some hoodies in case we got cold, our phones, and a flashlight Jason grabbed from the kitchen drawer. We didn't plan to swim around or anything. Just hang out and maybe walk along the shore. We headed down a side street and onto the wooden boardwalk, then took the steps down to the sand. As expected, it was basically completely deserted. The waves were steady, and the only light came from a few lamps on the boardwalk and the moon behind some clouds. There was barely enough visibility to make out where the water met the shore. We walked along the edge of the surf, occasionally letting the cold water hit our ankles. We joked around, talked about random stuff, and just killed time. After a while, we stopped near one of the lifeguard towers, those wooden ones they take down at night, and we just lay in the sand, looking up at the sky. That's when Jason noticed something. He suddenly sat up and said, Is that someone walking over there?" We all sat up and looked in the direction he was pointing. At first, I didn't see anything. It just looked like a dark blur near the shoreline. But then, yeah, I saw it, a figure. But it was just a silhouette at that point, walking slowly right along the edge of where the water touched the sand, probably 50 or 60 yards away. We figured it was just another person out late like us, maybe just going for a walk. But then we noticed that their movement was off. They weren't strolling around like someone enjoying the beach. Their walk was stiff, slow, and almost mechanical. Their arms didn't swing naturally, and their posture was strange. Their head was tilted down, but not fully. It looked like they were staring at the sand, or maybe scanning it. We all stopped talking and just quietly watched them. Something about it put me on edge. I remember whispering, "What the hell are they doing?" Marcus suggested that maybe they're just looking for something. Jason joked that it was probably some drunk tourist who dropped their keys. We kind of laughed it off and went back to messing around. But I kept glancing at the person. A few minutes passed, and I noticed they had stopped moving. They weren't walking anymore. They were standing completely still now, and they were definitely closer, maybe 30 yards away. That's when I started feeling uncomfortable. We tried not to stare or shine our light at them, but it was getting hard to ignore. There was just something off about the entire thing. Marcus finally said, "They've been standing there for like 5 minutes. Who just stands like that?" Then Jason said something that made my stomach drop. He said, "He's not just standing, he's looking at you, Kyle." I didn't know if he was joking or not. I kind of laughed nervously and said, "Nah, he's looking at the sand." But Jason shook his head and said, "No, look closer. His head's tilted at you." That's when Jason pointed the flashlight at him. I didn't even want him to do that, honestly, but he clicked it on and aimed the beam. The light hit the figure for just a second before the battery started dying and it flickered out. But that second was enough. I saw him. He was almost grayish, white with no shirt. He was wearing wet jeans, clearly from the ocean. His arms hung completely limp at his sides. His head was tilted at a weird angle, not broken, but unnatural. And his eyes were wide open, almost bulging. The second that beam of light hit him, he moved fast. Without any hesitation, he broke into a full sprint straight at us. I can't even describe how unnatural it looked. There was no build-up. He went from standing completely still to running at full speed, almost like he launched forward. All three of us screamed and bolted. We didn't even look back, we just ran. I could hear Marcus behind me yelling, "Go," as our feet pounded into the sand. My lungs were burning. We ran all the way back to the steps leading up to the boardwalk and didn't stop until we got to the street. Only then did we turn around, but he wasn't there. The beach was empty. There were no footprints behind us, just the sound of waves. We stood there frozen, trying to make sense of it. We didn't talk much on the walk back to the house. When we got inside, we locked all the doors and windows, pulled the blinds shut, and stayed up until the sun came up. None of us could sleep. I kept expecting to hear knocking or see that pale face outside the window, but thankfully it never came. The next morning, we tried to laugh it off again, say it was probably just some cracked-out homeless guy trying to scare people. But deep down, none of us believed that. The way he moved, the way he appeared out of nowhere, the lack of footprints, it made no sense. We stayed one more night, but we didn't leave the house. We left early the next morning. Over the next few weeks we tried to move on, but then Jason texted me one night. He said he'd been having dreams. The same dream over and over. He'd wake up and see the guy standing in the corner of his room, soaking wet, head tilted, just staring at him. No movement, no talking, just standing. I told him that was messed up, but I didn't tell him that I was having the exact same dream. Everything was the same. The guy, the posture, just standing in my room, not moving and not talking. Sometimes I wake up thinking I hear the sound of wet footsteps in my hallway. But when I check, no one's there. Then last week, almost a year later, I was scrolling through this local Facebook group that posted about stuff going on in Ocean City. Someone uploaded a photo they'd taken the night before from the beach. It was grainy and dark, but I recognized what they were talking about. They said, "Does anyone know who this creepy guy is that I saw standing by the water at like 1 a.m.? I clicked the photo. It was blurry, but I recognized him instantly. Same posture, same pale skin. He was just looking down at the water. The comments chilled me even more. There were dozens of people saying they'd seen him too. Some said he was there for hours. One person said they watched him walk into the water and never come back out. Another said they found wet footprints on their back porch 2 streets from the beach. No prints leading to or from them. I don't know what we saw that night, but I know this. I'll never go back to that beach at night again. I grew up in Massachusetts, and every summer since I could remember, I would spend the 3 months in a classic coastal New England town. You know the type if you've been in that area of the country. I had a big group of friends who always did the same thing, and we would get up to all kinds of shenanigans every day after our respective jobs. I was 19 years old when this happened, like most of my friends, and I had just gotten off of a dockboy job I had, so, like any other night, I texted my friends what the plan was and picked up my friend, who I'll call Emerson, from his job to go get alcohol, as he was the one with a fake ed. We got the alcohol and went back to the small town where we lived. We decided to get on my family's boat, that I was able to take out on my own to have some beers, while we waited for everyone else to finish what they were doing. We drove around the little peninsula we were on to this place, where a lot of people anchor and hang out. There were a couple of boats anchored already, and it was about 7 p.m., but it still wasn't unusual. We found a spot between the 2 boats, threw the anchor down, and just chilled and drank. We were having a nice time listening to the music from the boat to our left when the one to our right decided to leave. And then eventually the other boat's music shut off. We thought they were going to leave as well. So Emerson and I, in our new drunken state, began to groan and yell to turn the music back on to keep the party going and a bunch of other stupid stuff like that. But it didn't happen. We were sitting on the bow and started to drink again, before Emerson said, "Dude, look." I turned around to look at the boat and saw 3 people standing on the edge, just looking at us. My first reaction was to laugh because I was drunk, and then I turned back around, but Emerson kept staring at them. Now, admittedly, I don't have a great sense of danger. I tend to be optimistic and light-hearted about most things, but Emerson was obviously uncomfortable. I told him not to worry about it. They were probably just trying to get a better look or something, but he kept looking with an uncomfortable look on his face, which I didn't get at the time. At this point, it's pretty dark. Nothing illuminating the area but the lights from their boat, and therefore, you couldn't really see who it was, just the silhouettes of these people. After a couple of minutes of trying to get Emerson to snap out of it, I turned back around and saw they were in the same position, staring at us. I thought it was a joke. So I got the megaphone from the compartment over the steering wheel and said, "20 to watch, fellas." Which pissed Emerson off because he sensed something wasn't right. I was putting it back when I heard one of them laugh audibly, a man, but something was off about it. It sounded almost sinister. It was slow and low, and it was kind of raspy. It was at that point that I started to feel uncomfortable. Emerson got up and said, "Let's get the hell out of here." "Bro, this ain't right." But I responded that it was fine. Right after that, we heard 2 splashes in the water from their direction and saw that only one silhouette remained on the boat. That made Emerson immediately start pulling the anchor up as I was laughing at the situation and at him. Which, looking back now, was unbelievably stupid. He tried telling me to turn the engine on while I was laughing my ass off, watching him pull the anchor up as I was trying to drink my beer. In fact, I was laughing so much that I didn't notice the sound of the 2 people swimming near our boat. Emerson paused and looked at me with the anchor in his hands, which made me pause too. We couldn't see into the water as it was dark, and the lights were off with the boat. I called out, "Hello," and got nothing. Even the sound of the splashing water stopped. Right after that, I simultaneously heard Emerson yell, "Oh," and a sudden splash of water behind me, before I turned and saw someone trying to climb onto the back of our boat. I freaked the hell out and, while turning the key, I saw a hand grab the railing on the side of our boat near Emerson, who was yelling and holding the anchor up, ready to fight. I finally turned the boat on and instinctively gunned it forward, smashing into the sandbar that was right in front of us. I put it in reverse and drove backward as fast as possible until we were out of the little bay and back into more open water. I threw it back in neutral, and Emerson and I just looked at each other before he started giving me the "I told you so, and you're a dumbus." I fully agreed and said we should go back, at which he agreed. In hindsight, we should have hightailed it back to the boat docks near my house, but for some reason, we decided to pick up everything that was thrown around during our escape. We didn't even finish before I noticed, in the direction we just came from, the lights of a boat approaching, and it was approaching fast. I said, "No way," and jumped back to the steering wheel and pushed full throttle. Our boat is old, so it doesn't go super fast. And even though I was full speed ahead, they were gaining on us. Emerson started to lose it, saying things like, "Who are these guys? What do they want? Why can't they just let us chill on the water?" So, I told him to chill out and focused on going straight to the docks. After about 5 minutes, the docks were in sight, but the boat behind us was so close that we could see the bow itself going up and down with the waves. I honestly didn't know what to do. I banged a hard left and got as close to the shore as I could without beaching. And miraculously, the other boat peeled off in the other direction. We breathed a sigh of relief, but I still went full speed back to the docks. After docking and being relieved at the fact that there wasn't any damage to the boat, we met up with our friends after that and told them what had happened, and also came up with some theories. Like maybe they wanted to rob us, or maybe they wanted to take the boat. We didn't recognize the boat, so they probably weren't from around here. I don't know. I don't like to think about what would have happened. I'm just glad we didn't find out. I do know that I'm thankful for Emerson being there. Without his skepticism, I think things definitely could have taken a turn for the worse. This happened several summers ago when I was still living in my childhood home with my parents. I was 17. One random weekend, my parents went away for a few days without taking me with them, which was pretty much unheard of. They're the kind of people who are always at home, constantly keeping the house in order and rarely ever taking time away for themselves. In all my years living there, I couldn't remember a single time they'd ever gone away together like that. Naturally, I decided to take advantage of the rare opportunity, and I invited over MJ, my girlfriend at the time, to spend the weekend. It felt like a once-in-a-lifetime chance to have the house to myself without any interruptions. MJ had this playful, devious side to her that made every moment feel a little more exciting than it should have been. Admittedly, that's one of the reasons why we didn't work out. But I'm not going to open that can of worms right now. Knowing her, I should have been able to predict what was going to happen that night. As soon as she saw my heated pool glowing away in the backyard, her eyes lit up with a spark of mischief. She told me we should skinny dip, grinning like it was the most obvious idea in the world. I told her my neighbors would see, but she pestered me and made the very good point that we'd probably never get the chance again. We had gone swimming many times but had never done something that devious before. At least I hadn't. I was always the well-behaved, polite kid growing up. Even now I sometimes scold myself for being too nice. Anyway, it took a lot of convincing for me to agree, but MJ had a way about her. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and before long we were in the pool laughing and splashing under the night sky. It was actually a really romantic moment, as cheesy as that sounds. The water was warm against the cool summer air, and everything felt perfect, almost surreal. Let me quickly describe the house. The pool was right outside the large bay windows that overlooked the living room. Because it was so dark outside and the lights inside were still on, we had a perfect view into the house. It was like looking into a lit-up dollhouse. I'm sorry if that doesn't make sense, but if you saw a picture, you'd get what I'm talking about. For a while, that view made me feel safe, like we were still connected to the house, even while we floated outside in our own little bubble. That comfort didn't last long, though. At one point, as MJ was talking about something, I don't even remember what, I glanced up at the windows and froze. I saw the last thing I expected to see. On one of the far living room walls was a shadow. It was faint but distinct, and I knew it was definitely a shadow because of how it was moving. I watched in horror as it moved out of sight, like someone was walking deeper into the house. My heart started pounding. I felt a surge of panic, but I didn't want to scare MJ. I whispered to her that we needed to get out of the pool. She didn't question me. She just quickly followed my lead as I tried to get out of the pool and dry off as discreetly as possible. I told Minjae to hide in the pool house, turn off the light, and stay completely silent until I came back. Her playful demeanor was completely gone. I could tell she was freaking out, but she was doing a really good job keeping it together. She nodded and slipped into the pool house without another word. I opened the back door as quietly as I could and stepped into the kitchen. I was going to handle the situation myself. That's just how my parents had raised me. I grabbed a knife off one of the cutting boards and started moving through the house. Someone had definitely been in there. That much was obvious. I started noticing small, subtle signs that didn't make any sense to me. A chair in the dining room was slightly pulled out, like someone had been sitting there. A picture frame on the wall was crooked. A coffee mug I didn't remember using was sitting on the counter. Stuff like that. Stuff that no rational robber would ever waste time doing. As I moved through the house, I started considering the possibility that it wasn't a robber I was looking for. My heart rate must have been insane at that point. I thought I was going to be tackled every 5 seconds, but nothing ever happened. I checked every room on the ground floor, but I didn't find anyone. All the doors were locked, and all the windows were shut tight. It didn't make any sense. If someone had been inside, where were they now? The more I wandered around the house, the more my masculine bravado disappeared. At one point, I just got fed up and decided to call the police. They arrived quickly and did a thorough search of the house and yard, but they didn't find anything either. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the backyard, nothing. They couldn't even come up with a legitimate method of entry. One of the officers suggested I might have scared off whoever it was, but I wasn't convinced. At a certain point, it was too late at night to do much else. The police left. MJ and I were too scared to stay in the house, but we didn't have another option. We locked every door, barricaded the bedroom, and tried to get some sleep. Around 4 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of creaking floorboards above me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the noise was way too obvious. Someone was moving upstairs. I listened for a while longer and started hearing footsteps moving down the stairs, like whoever it was trying to make their way outside. Adrenaline surged through me as I grabbed the knife I'd left on the nightstand. I told MJ to stay put and bolted out of the room. I moved as quickly and as quietly as I could, but by the time I reached the front door, it was wide open. Whoever had been inside was gone. I didn't even bother calling the police again. There was nothing they'd be able to do anyway. I just made sure all the doors were locked and went back to bed. The next morning, the full extent of the intrusion hit me. All of our kitchen knives were missing. All of them, which was definitely not something a rational person would do. They'd also taken smaller items, some cash, a few watches, random electronics, but it was the knives that haunted me. It felt like whoever had been inside had left a message, though I couldn't figure out what it was. When my parents came home and I told them what happened, they were surprisingly understanding. I'm not one to scare easily. Never have been, so this experience honestly didn't affect me much. But even now, I still sometimes acknowledge how strange it all was. I was never able to figure out how that person had gotten inside, or where they had been hiding while the police searched the house. This is always going to be one of those odd things that just sticks with a person forever. This happened last year during Holly Bash weekends. I go to Rowan University, and for anyone who doesn't know, Holly Bash is Rowan's big spring festival, kind of like our own mini Coachella. It's held every April on Holly Bush Green, right near the historic Holly Bush Mansion. There are carnival rides, food trucks, lawn games, and a concert with a surprise headliner. The whole campus shows up. It's supposed to be the most fun day of the year. I was a sophomore at the time, and like a lot of other students, I stayed out late that night. Rowan's in a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood. Glassboro doesn't really feel dangerous, even at 2 in the morning. That's probably why I didn't think much of it when I left my friend's dorm and started walking back to Chestnut Hall alone. What I didn't know was that earlier in the night, around 12:30 in the morning, a group of masked people, like 10 of them, maybe more, had been seen banging on doors and riding bikes around campus, including outside Chestnut. I personally never saw that firsthand, but apparently it was alarming enough that people were posting about it online while it was happening. I didn't check any of that stuff. I was just trying to get back to my dorm, so it's about 2:30 in the morning. I swipe into Chestnut Hall, go inside, and I'm walking towards the stairs when I notice someone sitting in the lounge. That alone isn't weird. It's a college dorm. People are up all the time. But the guy was wearing a mask, not a COVID mask like a full-on black ski mask. And he wasn't doing anything, just sitting there dead silent. It took me a second to process. I actually paused near the entrance of the lounge, kind of frozen. It didn't make sense. I had no idea what he was doing there or why he was masked, but it genuinely freaked me out. And then he jumped off the couch and turned towards me in one quick motion. I didn't even think. I ran down the hall and ducked into the nearest bathroom, locking the door behind me. I must have stayed in there for at least 5 minutes, long enough to hear the hallway go completely silent again. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but my gut was screaming at me. Eventually, I cracked the door open and peeked out. No one was in the hall. I thought maybe he had left. I stepped out. I didn't want to sprint and freak myself out even more, so I just walked toward the other exit. That's when I saw him again. He was still in the lounge, still masked, and this time he was directly across from where I had to walk. His bike was leaned against the door, and there was a chair wedged between the wall and the frame, like it had been jammed there on purpose. I had pepper spray on my keychain. I pulled it out and held it in front of me. I didn't aim or threaten him. I just showed that I had it, hoping it would be enough. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I walked past him. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't even flinch. It was like he wanted me to see him, like the fear was the whole point. I didn't look back. I pushed the other door open and left the building. I was halfway to Magnolia when I heard the sound of bikes behind me. 3 more masked people rode up next to me. They didn't touch me or try to grab me, but they were heckling me, laughing, saying things I couldn't make out. I know that sounds pretty harmless on its own, but a few of them were waving around what looked like guns, which was the part that freaked me out the most. I guess they could have been fake or airsoft guns even, but it was clear that they were trying to intimidate me. I tried to ignore them, but I could feel how close they were riding, just barely out of arm's reach. I made it to Magnolia and texted my friend to come meet me outside. He walked me back to Chestnut, and that made me feel a lot safer. Luckily, the bikers were gone by then. I didn't call the police that night. I wasn't hurt, but I was really scared. I can't even fully explain why. It wasn't until the next morning that I told my mom everything. She ended up reporting it, and later that night, some of my guy friends texted me that they'd also been approached by a group of masked guys, and a few of them had pulled guns. Nobody was hurt, but it was enough that campus police started taking it seriously. I've heard a lot of rumors about who those guys were. Some people think it was just a bunch of local kids trying to scare people. It's just the gun detail that freaks me out. It's likely that a group of armed non-students had somehow made their way into my dorm that night, the place I live. I've been scared to walk home alone ever since. This story happened 2 summers ago, back when I was still dating Amanda. I've kept it to myself for a while. Not because it's embarrassing or anything, but because I didn't want to risk unintentionally doxing her or her family. Now that we've been broken up for over a year, I think it's safe to talk about it. At the time, Amanda was working as a camp counselor for a summer program in the city. It wasn't exactly close to home, about a 25-minute drive from her quiet, wealthy suburban neighborhood. But she loved the job for reasons I still don't fully understand. I always thought it was a little beneath her, especially considering her aspirations in life. But I wasn't going to be a jerk and outright say that. Her house was exactly what you'd picture for a family in that kind of area. Big yard, 3 stories, high ceilings, and enough space to host just about any event. That's why when the camp counselors were deciding where to host their end-of-summer party, Amanda's house was the obvious choice. I'm probably making it sound like that was the first time she hosted camp-related parties, but that's not really the case. It just so happened that it was my first time experiencing one since I hadn't been dating her the previous summer. Her parents were out of town that weekend. They were always out of town, really. I don't want to get too deep into it out of respect, but Amanda's family dynamic was odd. Her relationship with her parents more closely resembled that of 3 colleagues rather than 3 family members. Everything was very transactional, and it was blatantly obvious to any onlooker that all 3 of them were versions of the same narcissistic, insecure person, even though they despised being compared to each other. That description is honestly a little harsh. Her dad was pretty chill, and I honestly missed the guy. But you know feelings. Anyway, the party was packed. Dozens of people crowded into the house and spilled out into the backyard. The vibe was lively and fun, and most of the guests were friendly and easygoing. Well, except for one guy, Pete. From the moment he showed up, I had a bad feeling about him. He was loud, overly confident, and spent way too much time talking to Amanda. It wasn't just small talk either. It was full-on flirting. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I felt disrespected, but I didn't want to make a scene. Amanda and I had been dating for a while, and while I trusted her most of the time, she had a bad habit of being a little too friendly with other guys. It was a sore spot in our relationship, and I knew bringing it up would only cause problems. I didn't want to come off as insecure, so instead of confronting Pete directly, I came up with a different plan. I started acting overly friendly toward him. Every time he finished a drink, I offered him another. We talked, laughed, and before long, Pete was drinking faster than he probably should have been. I don't exactly have the build of a heavy drinker, but the Irish and Mexican in my blood means my alcohol tolerance is always going to be absurdly high. My plan was to get him so wasted that he either made a fool of himself and the problem took care of itself, or he fell asleep and the problem took care of itself. It was a win-win. I was kind of surprised to discover that my plan had actually worked, and sooner than expected, too. By midnight, he was passed out on the basement couches, drooling into a pillow. I was smug about it, but Amanda saw right through me. She accused me of doing it on purpose, which I denied. After some tense back and forth, I finally admitted that I may have played a small role in it. We argued a little, but it wasn't anything serious. Just another disagreement to add to the pile. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that my petty stunt had put a damper on the night. As the party wore on, the house got louder, messier, and more chaotic. I needed a break, so I stepped outside to get some air. The driveway was cool and quiet, a nice contrast to the noise inside. I was leaning against Amanda's car, just staring up at the stars, when I noticed someone standing at the far edge of the property. The figure was motionless, just standing there in the dim glow of one of the street lamps. I squinted, trying to make out who it was. When they didn't move, I decided to approach them. It was probably the liquid confidence that made me do it. I don't think I would have done it otherwise. I asked, "Hey, can I help you?" Trying to sound friendly, but a little assertive. The figure took a few slow steps towards me before stopping. It was definitely a man. That much I could tell, but I couldn't make out any notable features since it was so dark. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he asked, "Are your parents home?" The question threw me off. It wasn't just what he asked. It was how he said it, like he already knew the answer. Before I could respond, he repeated his question, this time name-dropping Amanda's parents. He knew who they were. That was enough to turn the unease I'd been feeling into full-blown suspicion. I lied and told the guy my parents were inside, even though part of me thought he knew I didn't live there and that I was lying. Still, I thought maybe I could deter him from doing whatever he was going to do. The guy nodded and just said, "Okay," before turning and walking away. I expected him to head to a car or another house, but he didn't. Instead, he walked straight down the street, disappearing into the darkness. I watched him for as long as I could, but it was too dark to tell where he went. Something about it didn't sit right with me, but I tried to brush it off. I went back inside and ended up in the basement playing pong with a few other people. Amanda had a pool table upstairs, so most of the crowd was up there, leaving the basement quieter. I didn't feel like being my usual fun, social self, so I preferred the quieter atmosphere, where I could actually hear people talking. At some point I heard the doorbell ring. At first, I didn't think much of it. This was a party after all, so people coming and going wasn't anything out of the ordinary. But something in my subconscious was tugging at my brain, like there was something I was missing. As I stood there mindlessly slapping a pong ball around, I realized what it was. Amanda had instructed everyone to come through the back door, which didn't even have a doorbell. That meant someone had come up to the front door, which wasn't supposed to happen. I excused myself from the game and headed upstairs, knowing I was probably overreacting, but wanting an answer. As I walked past Amanda's room, I noticed she was passed out on her bed, completely oblivious to the chaos around her. That's when it hit me. I was probably the only somewhat sober person left in the house. I turned her bedroom light off and gently shut her door, trying not to disturb her. When I got to the front door, a girl named Bella was standing there. I asked if she knew who had rung the doorbell. She was belligerently drunk, so getting a coherent response out of her was about as easy as getting one out of a squirrel. That girl was also pretty brain dead sober, which didn't help matters. Eventually, she said that there was some old guy at the door who claimed to be a family friend and needed to return something he borrowed. In response to that, I yelled, "You let him in." She shrugged her shoulders and walked away, presumably to go spin the roulette wheel on which random guy she would be bringing home that night. I ran upstairs to Amanda's parents' room, and my worst fears were confirmed. Drawers were pulled open, jewelry boxes were empty, and the closet looked like it had been ransacked. That guy had robbed them. I figured he was already gone. I mean, the jewelry boxes were empty, the drawers were ransacked. It looked like he had taken what he had come for. I was about to head back downstairs when I noticed something move in the mirror on the back of the door. It was just a quick shift, like someone ducking out of view behind me. I turned around, but I wasn't fast enough. The guy tackled me before I even saw his face. He knocked the wind out of me as the two of us hit the ground, and I couldn't breathe. The guy started clawing at my shirt, like he was trying to rip it off of me. With all the strength I had, I managed to push him off, but it was more panic than strength. He got up and sprinted straight across the room, dove out one of the open windows, and landed on the roof with a thud. I ran to the window just in time to see him drop into the side yard and take off running. I didn't chase him. I wouldn't have been able to catch him anyway. I just stood there trying to process what had happened and catch my breath. The damage was done. He was gone. But the encounter took its toll. I didn't want to stay up any longer and chaperone everyone. I didn't want to be the guy to kick everyone out either, though. So, I actually called the police and told them to help me kick everyone out. Most of the local officers knew Amanda's family, so it wasn't like they were going to arrest anyone or do anything drastic. The cops came and kicked everyone out, and I secretly thanked them for their help. After they left, I went downstairs, slapped Pete awake, and told him he had to find some way home. He threw up before calling an Uber. The next morning, Amanda had no choice but to call her parents and tell them what had happened. They were furious as anyone would be, but Amanda didn't seem to care. She had always been rebellious, brushing off authority like it was beneath her. They didn't even bother calling the police. The house had no cameras, and they figured it would be a waste of time. I'm still not sure how that guy knew Amanda's parents weren't home. Part of me thinks whoever robbed them knew them in some capacity. Looking back, that night revealed more about Amanda than I wanted to admit. Her indifference, her carelessness, it was all a red flag I should have taken more seriously. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. This happened over the course of 3 or 4 years when I was a kid. I can't remember exactly when I got the first one, but I started having this recurring half-lucid nightmare maybe once every couple of months. From what I can remember, here's how it would go. I'd be lying in bed. Only the view wasn't from my first-person perspective. Instead, I'd be looking down at myself from the ceiling, like I was viewing my own bedroom through a security camera feed. The out-of-body dissociation always freaked me out. I tried to float or swim toward my body, but I was never able to move beyond swiveling my head to look around the room. I was half-lucid, so I knew it was a dream, but that didn't make me any less scared. After calming myself down, I'd start noticing strange things about my bedroom. For one, the digital clock on my nightstand would always be counting in reverse. That was typically the first strange detail I'd notice. And once I noticed that, I'd start seeing other weird stuff. There were these drawings taped to random spots on the walls and dresser, like crayon drawings you'd expect from a kid my age. But I had no memory of ever making them. I wasn't the type of kid who ever drew much, so it wasn't like I had just forgotten about them. They always showed the same thing, a row of people holding hands, all smiling with one smaller figure, who I can only imagine was me. They were always standing in front of a house with a blue roof. But I can't remember much more about the drawings than that. The other detail about the dreams that still sticks out to me is an old toy train of mine that was always sitting in a different spot on my bedroom floor, which was significant because I had lost that particular toy years prior. Anyway, after analyzing my room for a bit, I'd get this unexplainable urge to look out my bedroom window. I'd glance over and, as if it were on cue, a man would appear just a few inches from the glass. He had short gray hair and what looked like a cut on his left temple. That's honestly all I can remember about his face. He would watch me sleep for a few seconds, then start clawing at the window like he was trying to open it from the outside. That's usually when I woke up. Sometimes I immediately ran to the window, and sometimes I was too terrified to even move. But I always ended up checking one way or another. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Maybe claw marks or a smudge from where his hand had been. But there was never anything there, or anyone for that matter. After the 4th time it happened, I finally told my parents. My mom told me that recurring dreams weren't that rare, especially at my age, and my dad chimed in to remind me that they were always just one room away if I ever felt scared. I nodded and acted like that helped, but it didn't. Not really. My dad could tell I was still scared, so he took me by the hand and explored the exterior of the house with me. There was no indication that anyone had been there. No footprints, no smudges on the window, nothing. Even so, that didn't calm my nerves as much as you might think. Keep in mind, this was about 1 year in, so I was having this dream roughly once every 3 months. It wasn't happening every night, not even close. But having the exact same dream 4 times definitely means something, which I knew even at that age. But after that 4th dream, they just stopped. For a while at least. I went nearly 6 months without a single episode, and at some point, I let myself believe it was over. It all just kind of faded into the background, the way childhood fears tend to when life gets more normal. But then it came back. I have no idea what triggered it. But one random night, I had the dream again. Everything was exactly the same as I remembered: the clock, the drawings, the train, everything. But there was something different about that dream that was scaring me twice as much as the earlier ones had. I couldn't figure out what it was. Everything was following the exact same chain of events. But then, as I was looking around the room, I realized what it was. My bedroom window was open. As soon as I saw that, I woke up. There was a period of maybe 5 minutes where I couldn't move. Complete and utter sleep paralysis. And it wasn't a passive sleep paralysis either. My brain was screaming at me to check the window the entire time. But I couldn't drag myself out of bed no matter how much I tried. On top of that, I felt significantly colder, as if cold air was blowing through my bedroom window, which I was convinced was wide open. Those 5 minutes were unlike any kind of fear I have ever experienced. All I could think about was how that man was moments away from climbing through my window. Yet there was nothing I could do about it. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I forced myself over to the window, confirming that it was locked. I couldn't fall back asleep that night. I was too scared. I'm not sure how I was even able to function the following morning. Another couple of months went by, but I wasn't going to be fooled again. Every night before I went to bed, I thought long and hard about the dream in an attempt to brace myself for having it again. I'm not sure if this logic tracks, but I was hoping that keeping the dream in my mind would help me not get too scared should I have it again. To my surprise, that technique actually worked. The next time I had that dream, I wasn't even half as scared. I didn't even bother checking the window after waking up. By the time I had it again, I was barely scared at all. Still, something about it lingered. Not in a scary way, but enough to make me want to bring it up to my parents again. Maybe it was the way I explained it, or maybe it was because I was slightly older, but for whatever reason, they actually paid closer attention this time. I tried to provide as much detail as possible, something I hadn't done before. As I was getting to my description of the man, my parents' demeanor shifted. Not too dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Specifically, it was right as I was telling them about the cut on his forehead. Before I could even finish, my dad cut me off and asked if I was sure about the cut. I told him I was, and he looked over at my mom like there was some unspoken detail that I wasn't aware of. I asked my parents what was going on, and they assured me that everything was fine. Not wanting to upset them, I didn't inquire further. But from that point on, I started wondering if there was more to the story. As it would turn out, a few days after that conversation, my parents sat me down and came clean. It wasn't some dramatic reveal or anything. They just said there was something they wanted to tell me. My mom did most of the talking. Apparently, when I was really little, like too young to even remember, there was a man named Brian who used to watch me sometimes. They always referred to him as Uncle Brian, but he wasn't actually family, just a close friend of my dad's from college. I guess he was around a lot when I was a baby and a toddler, especially during the times when both my parents were working full-time. But something happened. My dad didn't give details, just said that there was a falling out between them, bad enough that they completely cut ties. He said he forbade Brian from ever coming near our family again, specifically from coming near me again. That was the end of it. I asked what caused the fallout, but they wouldn't tell me. They just repeated that it had nothing to do with me, and that I didn't need to worry. The only other thing they told me, and this is what gave me a sick feeling, was that Brian had a noticeable scar on his forehead from a car accident he'd been in years before I was born. They didn't connect the dots out loud, but they didn't have to. I was old enough to make the connection myself. Later that night, after my mom had gone to bed, my dad lingered in the living room with me a little longer. I could tell he wanted to say more, like he hadn't been totally satisfied with how the conversation went earlier. After a few moments of silence, he told me his theory. He said he thought the dreams were my brain's way of processing something buried really deep, some memory from when I was little before I could even form full sentences. He mentioned how close I apparently used to be with Brian, how I'd cry when he left the house, how I always wanted him to be the one to read me to sleep. My dad said he couldn't think of any other way I'd know about the scar on Brian's forehead. I didn't know what to make of that. I had no recollection of this Brian person whatsoever. Even now, I still can't recall a single memory with him in it. I had no choice but to move on with my life, though, recurring dream or not. Another handful of months passed. I'm doing my best to describe the timeline as accurately as possible, but it's hard to remember exactly how much time passed in between each dream. That said, The frequency decreased after talking to my parents. I had the dream only once or maybe twice within the next year. But things took a very dark turn sometime in year 4. One night after waking up from the dream, I glanced over at my window just out of habit. And this time I actually saw something move. It was just a flicker, but I was 100% sure something had just moved from right outside my window. And just like that, all the fear I had spent years trying to prevent came rushing back. It was actually worse. I jumped out of bed and screamed for my parents, who took me very seriously. My dad sprinted outside in his bare feet while my mom held me tightly. Eventually, my dad came back and started whispering stuff to my mom. They told me to stay put while they called the police. I listened to them and stayed in their room, although I don't remember ever hearing any sirens or other voices besides theirs that night. My dad insisted everything was fine and that the police were going to take care of things. The next day, he confessed to me that he had seen what he thought were extremely faint footprints underneath my bedroom window. I asked him if he thought it was Brian, and he said that was impossible since they had moved and Brian didn't know where we lived. My dad promised me that nothing bad was going to happen ever, and he would turn out to be right. I never had that dream again. My parents don't like talking about this incident, and I can see why. I'm still yet to get a straight answer out of them, but I've since stopped trying. What I can't wrap my head around is the sickening thought that every time I had that dream, there really was someone outside my window watching me. Was it really plausible that someone had been periodically stalking me for 4 years? It doesn't track, and I can't decide what's scarier, if it really was Brian watching me, or just some complete stranger that my brain associated with him for whatever reason. And who knows how that somehow got translated into my dreams. I've done research and I still don't even know how that would be possible. Maybe he was making a noise or something and my brain picked up on it. I really can't say. What I can say is that I'm 95% sure my parents never called the police that night. That's something I will likely never get an explanation for. I'll most likely never get any answers regarding this experience since it happened so long ago. But if I do, I'll send an update. I'm going to keep this as short as possible. Most nights I fall asleep to some form of sound. It's the best way I know how to knock out quickly. Sometimes it's a chess video. Sometimes it's a podcast about space. Sometimes it's just a recording of a thunderstorm. You get the idea. I'm a very active dreamer, so whatever I fall asleep to usually gets translated directly into my dreams in some form. For example, if I fall asleep to a soccer compilation, then it's likely I'll have a dream about playing soccer. Part of the reason this is so clutch is because I had a ton of nightmares growing up, and this technique prevents them. This happened a couple of weeks ago during a sleepover at my friend Duncan's place. It was a sleepover, so I had to fall asleep normally. That wasn't an issue for me. It just meant my dreams would be a lot less predictable. There were 3 of us, me, Duncan, and Ian. Duncan's parents were away for the weekend, which is why we were having the sleepover in the first place. He has a lot of big, comfy couches in his living room, so that's where we all slept. That night, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've had in a while. I was out at sea on this small sailboat. I don't even know where it came from. I've never been on a sailboat in my life. The water was super choppy, and I remember the sky being this weird mix of dark purple and gray. The wind was howling, but not in a scary way. It kind of felt like I was in a movie or something. Then the boat lurched. I couldn't see what we hit, but I definitely felt it. Whatever it was, it knocked the whole sail sideways and cracked something underneath. Water started gushing in through the bottom, and I remember trying to plug the hole with my jacket, which obviously wasn't doing anything. I started panicking, like full-on helpless panic, and just as the boat started to sink, a dolphin jumped out of the water, locked eyes with me, and said in perfect English, "Wake up." That instantly snapped me awake. I'm usually pretty groggy after waking up, but this was different, although I didn't know why yet. I looked around the room trying to figure out if anything was different or strange, but everything looked normal. My friends were sleeping next to me, and the living room was exactly how we left it. You know that weird in-between phase right after you wake up, where you can't really process information accurately. That's what I was experiencing. A few seconds later, though, my brain started functioning properly, and I picked up on a sound that was definitely out of place. There was this distinct rushing sound coming from somewhere upstairs. It wasn't muffled like you'd expect if a faucet was just dripping. It was consistent, like a hose or something. That must have been why I had that wonky dream about the ocean. I sat there for a second, trying to figure out what I was hearing. Then, like an idiot, I got up to check it out myself. I crept up the stairs, trying to make as little noise as possible. The noise got louder with each step. It was definitely running water, and it was coming from the upstairs bathroom at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly cracked open, and even from a distance, I could see the sink. One of the knobs was turned all the way to the right. The water was just gushing out full blast. There was no way that could have happened on its own. It didn't even make sense. I got close to the doorway and was about to step in, but something made me stop. The bathroom up there is pretty big. It's got this long counter and a bathtub with a curtain, plus this awkward corner where the toilet is. Plenty of blind spots. For all I knew, someone could have been crouching behind the tub or standing right behind the door. My stomach dropped. I don't know why, but I just couldn't go in. I backed up and booked it down the stairs to wake up Duncan. I shook him hard and told him something was wrong. At first, he was groggy, but the urgency in my voice must have gotten through, because he sat up and asked what was going on. I told him the sink upstairs was blasting, and I thought someone was in the house. That woke him up real fast. We left Anne asleep on the couch and crept back up together. When we got to the bathroom door, Duncan didn't even hesitate. He pushed it open and stepped inside. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. Almost immediately, a figure launched from around the corner and tackled Duncan from the side. It happened so fast. All I saw was Duncan go down and this guy swinging a piece of PVC pipe like he was about to beat the crap out of him. I didn't think. I just threw myself at the guy, trying to get him off Duncan. We both piled on him and wrestled him to the floor, but he was bigger than both of us. It was pure chaos. Eventually, the guy broke free and bailed, shoving both of us to the side and sprinting for the stairs. By the time Duncan and I made it to the porch, he was gone. The police showed up maybe 30 minutes later, but they weren't much help. They determined that the entry point was a downstairs window, which was wide open and had been previously unlocked. Duncan's family doesn't have cameras in their house, so there was no evidence we could turn over. The police said that it was likely that it had just been a burglar committing a random attack, but my friends and I think it was way more specific than that. First of all, why would a burglar purposely make noise by turning on a sink faucet in the first place? Yeah, it was obviously a trap to lure someone upstairs, but what was the point if he was trying to rob the place? This makes me think he had a more sinister intention, one I can't fully explain. Duncan is convinced that whoever broke in knew his parents were out of town and had expected only one person to be there that night, him. If that's true, then I can only imagine that whoever had broken in intended on seriously injuring or killing Duncan. I don't even like to think about what would have happened had I gone in that upstairs bathroom by myself. This happened on a Friday night a couple of months back. My girlfriend's parents had planned a weekend trip out of town, some kind of anniversary thing, I think. So, naturally, my girlfriend Bonnie invited me to stay at her place. Normally, her parents are pretty strict, and sleeping over in her room is definitely off limits, but since they'd be gone the whole weekend, we figured it wouldn't hurt anyone. Bonnie lives in one of those suburban neighborhoods where every house looks the same, quiet enough that by 10 o'clock it always feels deserted. Honestly, that place creeps me out a little whenever I leave late at night. So, I was relieved at the thought of just staying put for once. I showed up around 8, brought snacks, and we watched a movie, the usual stuff. Bonnie's room is on the second floor, facing the backyard, and from her window, you can just barely see into the dense line of trees that borders their property. They don't have much exterior lighting, so at night it's pitch black out there, like looking straight into a void. Bonnie has a queen-sized bed, so we both had plenty of space, enough that we could stretch comfortably without crowding each other. I'll skip the rest of the irrelevant stuff. We eventually turned off the TV around midnight and drifted off. I don't remember falling asleep, but I vividly remember the unsettling dream that followed. Now, before I tell you about it, I want to say one thing. I've only had a false awakening dream a couple of times in my life before. This night was one of them. For anyone who's never had one, it's a really strange and almost transcendent experience. Dreams like the one I'm about to describe are actually the main reason I believe there are things in this world beyond those that we can see. In the dream, I woke up abruptly to the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut somewhere downstairs. Before I could even process it, rapid footsteps started racing up the stairs. Without hesitation, I shot up in the bed with the intention of intercepting whoever had broken in. But something stopped me. Bonnie's room looked identical to how it had looked when we went to sleep, Every detail exactly as it should have been. Except for one thing that I can still picture in my mind's eye even now. A thin yellow glow was spilling into the bedroom from the crack beneath the bedroom door. It was just a sliver of light, but for some reason, I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. All my confidence was gone. My vision began tunneling into this little bar of light as everything else started fading to black. The footsteps made it up the stairs and started storming toward the door, but I couldn't do anything about it. I was frozen, and then silence. I was still fixated on the light below the door when the voices started. At first, it was just one voice, a woman's voice saying all sorts of nasty things about me, insults about my appearance, my outlook on life, my future. But then things started getting more personal. It knew things about me, deeply personal things I'd never shared with anyone, not even Bonnie. It started reciting events from my past, things I had said, things I had done, things no stranger would know, things no stranger could know. One voice became two became three, and before I knew it, there were 100 voices tormenting me with my darkest, most repressed secrets. It genuinely felt like the darkest pieces of my brain were being dragged out of my head and thrown under a microscope. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw off the covers, bolted across the room, and swung open the bedroom door, ready to confront whoever was harassing me. But the instant the door opened, every light in the house snapped off, and I was plunged into pure darkness. The voices stopped, and the air turned ice cold, sharp enough to sting my skin, and for a split second, it felt like I'd stepped into another world entirely. I stumbled backward in a disoriented haze until I found the bed, then scrambled under the covers like I was 6 years old again. And then I woke up, only I was still dreaming at that point. I just didn't know it. I sat up slowly, obviously still scared, but trying to reassure myself that the nightmare was over. But to my horror, when I looked at the bedroom door, I saw that same beam of light pouring into the room. And then I heard the downstairs door slamming shut again, followed by those same frantic footsteps stomping up the stairs. The entire sequence replayed itself with agonizing precision. The footsteps stopping at the door, the voices, the sequence, the whole thing. I couldn't help myself. I again ran toward the door and threw it open, only to experience that same cold darkness as before. When I finally woke up for real, my heart was racing. I was 75% sure I had actually woken up, but I was so disoriented from the strangeness of that double false awakening dream that I couldn't be sure. Bonnie was sound asleep next to me, completely unaware of what I had just been through. That's when I knew I was awake for real. In my dream, I hadn't even thought to look over at the other side of the bed. I started to relax, but when I sat up to look at the bedroom door, I damn near screamed. There under the door was that same strip of light that I had seen in my dreams. It was the exact same image. It didn't make sense. Bonnie and I were alone, and every single light in the house was supposed to be off. For a second, I just stared, unsure of what to make of what I was seeing. But then I heard footsteps downstairs, clear as day. Someone was inside the house. Right away, I knew we were being robbed. Without another thought, I pulled out my phone and discreetly called the police. After telling them what was happening, I tiptoed over to the door just to make sure it was locked. Then I crept back to Bonnie and gently woke her up, putting my hand over her mouth so she wouldn't accidentally make a noise. She didn't scream or anything when I told her, which was a huge relief. It felt like forever. But after a few tense minutes, the police arrived at the house. Things got loud downstairs. The police actually kicked in the front door, and there was a bunch of shouting. When I felt like it was safe to do so, I went downstairs just in time to see 2 masked men being ushered into a police car in cuffs. I talked to the officers for a bit and thanked them before going back upstairs. It was late, but Bonnie's parents rushed back from their trip early once they heard what had happened. They weren't even mad that I had stayed the night. After hearing my story, they were actually grateful. About a week after that, Bonnie called me with. I went to a somewhat typical high school, not in a traditional American suburb, but a more rural high school. Some kids go to schools with graduating classes of like 500 to, heck, even 1,000 kids. My high school had, I think, a little less than 200 kids in my graduating class. It was the kind of high school where even if you weren't friends with someone, you still knew them by face and name. Walking down the hallways, you'd know basically 99% of your peers, at least in your own graduating class. Coming from a quiet town, there weren't a lot of crazy news stories, really. It was pretty uneventful there. What we did for fun after school was actually go out and play sports and ride our bikes around and stuff like that. This was like 17 years ago, though. So I guess things may be a lot different these days for kids. Another thing I always felt was unique about our school was that there didn't really seem to be any bullying for the most part. At least not the typical cliché movie-style bullying where kids are getting pushed into lockers or having their lunch money stolen. When I think back now, I can't really name a single kid from my graduating class who could be labeled as a bully. Sure, there were kids who would tease others, but nothing too serious. Of course, there were quiet kids in our grade, like every school has, but there was one kid in my grade who literally never spoke at all. I'm going to call him Luke for this story. He wasn't even a weird-looking kid or anything. He seemed pretty nice to people who went out of their way to interact with him. I shared one class with him, though. It was an elective that had kids from all 4 grades in it. Luke and I were juniors when this happened. This elective was a computer class, and back when this happened, the computer rooms in our high school were still using those big, bulky box computers. I remember the layout of this classroom. There was an aisle in the middle separating 2 columns of tables, and the 2 columns had 4 rows each. Each row had 4 seats, and each student had their own computer. This class wasn't full, so there were probably like 26 filled seats out of 32. Luke always sat in the second row in the furthest seat to the left with no one next to him, as everyone else sat with people they knew from their respective grades. Unfortunately, not long into the semester, the seniors in the class started collectively picking on Luke. By this, I mean some of the seniors would make jokes about how quiet Luke was, saying it was scary when the teacher would ask certain things. For whatever reason, our teacher never stood up for Luke and told them to cut it out. The teacher was a bit of a pushover from what I remember. Maybe that was why. As the semester went on, it got a little worse. I remember at one point seeing a small piece of paper fly from the back row from the seniors right to the back of Luke's head. I remember he turned around and had this very telling look. The seniors continued to make fun, one of them saying, "Wasn't me," and blaming one of the other seniors. The look on Luke's face just looked like a mix of sadness, anger, and defeat. I genuinely felt bad, but I didn't get involved. Eventually, one day, I saw Luke sitting on a curb not far from the high school after school ended. I passed by him as I was walking to my car. I have an early birthday, so I was driving around halfway through junior year. Given we were in a quiet area, no one was exactly within walking distance from school, so I did the right thing and said, "What's up?" and asked if he needed a ride home. His face literally lit up a bit as he said yes. We walked to my car, and from there, he guided me to his house. It was about a 10-minute drive to his house. We talked a lot during that car ride. I told him he should just ignore the seniors in our computer class. I said they're a bunch of deadbeats anyway. He said they're not the only ones he's sick of. He implied that he deals with people picking on him in multiple classes, which honestly made me feel pretty terrible for him. In those 10 minutes, I felt like I learned a lot about Luke and got to know him as a person just a bit. He seemed like a decent kid. As I dropped him off, I made a comment to him about how close we lived. Then we said goodbye. Every day in class after that, we'd say hey to each other, but admittedly, I unfortunately never got involved whenever he got picked on. Well, one day, Luke didn't show up to class. Computer class was 4th period. It wasn't until 7th period English that an announcement came over the loudspeaker saying, "Lockdown. This is not a drill." I remember everyone looking around nervously, and I remember our teacher looking the most nervous. She ran to turn off the lights and told everyone to hurry to one corner of the room. Seeing how nervous our teacher was only made all the students even more nervous. We sat with the lights off for a long time. It had to be 20 to 30 minutes until there was another message on the loudspeaker. It was the principal explaining that there was someone in a mask carrying a black duffel bag trying to get into the school. Our school had really good security, and when someone spotted that person approaching the school with what could only be assumed to be guns or any kind of weapons in that duffel bag, the doors were all locked. The school day was cut short after that once a few police cars were on the scene. I remember it being a Friday, so I took a few of my friends home to my house so we could hang out. I'd be lying if I said I remember the small details thereafter of that day. But I think it was that same night that I woke up in the middle of the night to light tapping at my window. I could see someone on the other side of the glass. I started freaking out, and before running to get my dad, I took a closer look and then said, "Who is it?" I heard Luke's voice as he said his name. I felt like my heart dropped a second time. I went over to the window and lifted it just a crack. I said, "What are you doing? How did you find me?" He said, "Through the window. I tried to do something bad." It instantly clicked. I mean it. It instantly clicked in my head that it was him. Before he could even tell me, I said, "Was it you who caused the lockdown?" He said, "Yes." I was scared to ask him what he was planning on doing. Instead, I asked him how he found me. He admitted to remembering the deli that I said I lived by, and he eventually found my car after biking around the area. That explanation didn't make it any less disturbing. Luke asked me if he could come in and talk about what he planned on doing, and I said, "No, I cannot let you in, nor can I hear what you planned on doing." I actually recommended he go to the school and confess to whatever he was going to do. When he refused to walk away from my window, I said, "Dad," really loudly, which worked in scaring him off. I went to my parents' room and woke them up to tell them. My mom was the one who insisted on calling the police. She was distraught. When a police officer eventually came, I had no choice but to tell the truth. I gave Luke's identity, and I explained that he had just come to my window admitting to potentially almost doing something horrible at the school. Obviously, the police were already aware of the lockdown, so I believe police were sent to his house that night. After speaking with Luke's parents, they realized Luke wasn't there. I believe it was the next day that Luke was either found, or he just returned home, and police were still waiting there, and he confessed to what he told me. As far as our graduating class knew, Luke was charged with something like making a terroristic threat. I know he did time, and I know he's been out a long time. To be honest, I don't really know if he's still around. Part of me always wanted to feel bad for Luke, witnessing how loneliness and getting picked on can probably eat away at someone. He followed me and came to me simply because I showed him an act of kindness, something I unfortunately believe nobody else showed him. Still, the fact that he admitted to bringing a gun to school with a mask on, even if he didn't admit to intending on carrying out the implied threat, I can't fully believe he simply came to the school with a gun just to scare people. I think he, for a split second, had a horrible plan, got cold feet, and regretted it. I just hope Luke eventually got the help he needed. This happened in 2016, back when I was in 5th grade. If you remember that year, you probably remember all the killer clown sightings that were happening around the country. At the time, it was all over the news and social media. Most adults thought it was just some dumb trend or prank. But for young kids, it was actually pretty scary. It was a normal day at school. I went to an elementary school in a quiet suburban area where I still live. Nothing weird ever really happens here. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm guessing, because it was closer to the end of the school day. We were in class working on some random assignment, and the classroom was quiet except for a few people whispering. Then one of the students in my class suddenly said out loud, "There's a clown outside." I still remember her high-pitched voice as she said it. Some of us stood up and looked toward the window. And yeah, there really was a clown outside. He was standing just a few feet away from the window, facing our classroom directly. He was wearing a baggy, dirty red and yellow clown suit, and had white face paint with black around the eyes. He was smiling and staring in at us with this big fake grin. After a few seconds, he started waving slowly. Some of the kids thought it was funny and laughed. Others were clearly freaked out. Our teacher, Mrs. Riker, walked over to the window, looked at the guy for a second, and then said through the glass, loud and annoyed, "Excuse me, classes are in session. You need to get out of here." The clown didn't react at all. He just kept standing there, smiling and waving. Mrs. Riker told us all to sit back down and said she was calling the front office. She picked up the corded classroom phone, then walked into the hallway with it and spoke quietly. The phones in the classrooms were always next to the door, so that's how she was able to walk outside the room with it. She came back in moments later and hung up. She walked over to the window and shut all the blinds after she saw that the man in the clown costume was still there, doing the same creepy waving motion, smiling, and general clownish mannerisms. Not even 2 minutes later, the principal's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Staff, please get your classrooms into lockdown formation." There was a sense of urgency in the voice that, looking back, was probably to alert the teachers that it wasn't a drill without causing all the kids to go into a panic. That's when it got serious. Mrs. Riker rushed to turn off the lights and told us all to get under our desks. She pulled the door shut and locked it. Everyone was quiet. Some kids were giggling, but others looked scared. I was definitely scared. We stayed like that for what felt like forever. But it was actually about 30 minutes. Nobody knew what was happening, but eventually, the principal came back on the loudspeaker and said the lockdown was over and that the situation had been handled. Apparently, school security had confirmed that the clown was gone. They didn't tell us anything else. Classes went on like normal for the rest of the day. It felt weird. Everyone was talking about it during dismissal, but the teachers didn't say much. After school, I was walking home with my friend Chris. We lived in the same neighborhood, just a few blocks away. While we were walking, a couple of fifth-grade girls behind us suddenly ran past us, looking panicked. One of them said, "There's someone in the woods." We stopped and turned around. Behind the school, there's a small patch of trees. It's not deep woods or anything, just enough to separate the school from the street behind it. Standing just barely out of view near the edge of the woods was the clown again. Same dirty outfit, same painted face. He was half hidden by the trees, but he was clearly waving. He wasn't just waving at random, he was doing it slowly, directly at the girls who had just passed us, like he was trying to call them over. Chris and I didn't say anything. We just ran. I don't know what happened after that, but I told my parents as soon as I got home. They called the school, and later I heard from another kid that the police were called again and patrolled the area. But they never found anyone. To this day, nobody knows who that guy was. I don't know if he was just trying to scare some kids, or if he was planning something worse. What freaks me out the most is that he came back after the lockdown and waited, hidden in the trees watching kids go home. This happened not long ago. I live on the outskirts of Philadelphia, where it's me, my son, and my stepdaughter. I say stepdaughter because I've legally taken in my best friend's daughter. Around 2016, my best friend John was murdered by her husband. He ended up making national headlines and was convicted of 5 more murder cases. He's facing 3 consecutive life sentences with no parole. Now I'm a middle school teacher at my son's school. He's in the grade below what I teach. My stepdaughter is in the grade above what I teach, so their classrooms are not far from mine. This incident took place on March 30th, 2020, when the lockdowns were slowly taking place. Where I taught, the school was rather distant from anywhere. The next school was about 10 miles away. The gas station was about 2 miles away, and the nearest park was about 600 meters from where we were. So, we were one of the last schools to go into lockdown. Around midday in March. It was a normal, hectic Monday. I was teaching math at that time for the 6th graders. All of a sudden, I got a notification on my phone that someone was there to pick up my stepdaughter. The system works so that the main emergency number gets a notification if someone is picking up your child. The thing is, my stepdaughter was 3 classes down from me. She had no appointments, no close family that lived within a good radius from us. I replied that I'm here at school, and no one within a 10-mile radius is picking her up. This was sending alarm bells off left and right. They said the person picking her up was her biological dad. The school doesn't have that type of information on file. A few minutes went by on the phone, and it was dead silent. The lady told me she was going to call the principal and see what he wanted to do from there. A gut feeling didn't sit right with me. I called my stepdaughter's classroom and asked for her to be sent to my room. Just as I hung up, I was back to teaching when my stepdaughter came into the classroom. Not even 10 minutes later, the lockdown siren went off. I had kids push desks to the door and barricade the windows, and everyone sat in the corner. I had a pretty good feeling about who this lockdown was about. We were in a lockdown for about 46 minutes at this point. My main concern was how he had gotten out. About 2 hours later, the lockdown was lifted, and I was escorted out by the police. I was further questioned about how I knew this man due to the C-piece records. I said I took my best friend's daughter in and explained the whole story. The police informed me that he had gotten out when a prison bus transporting inmates to another cell was hit by a car that came swerving in and crashed into it, leaving 10 prisoners dead on the scene, 2 prison guards knocked out, and 20 escaped. There were police already at our house, waiting for the dad to show up, but he never did. When they heard about the lockdown at the school, they knew it was one of the prisoners. If they had never gotten there on time, I honestly have no idea what would have happened. This happened during my freshman year of high school. I'm 21 now, and I still think about it all the time. I went to a public school in a pretty average suburban town. We did lockdown drills maybe once every couple of months. So when this one started, that's exactly what I thought it was, just a drill. It was a Wednesday, 4th period. I remember because it was Earth Science, and we had just finished a pop quiz. I was putting my stuff into my backpack when the loudspeaker came on and said, "This is a lockdown. Lock all doors, lights off, stay quiet." At first, nobody panicked. Our teacher, Mrs. Chen, sighed, got up, and locked the door like usual. She turned off the lights and told us all to get into the corner of the room away from the door. Everyone was laughing a little and whispering like it was no big deal. But then we heard a second announcement. Same voice, but it sounded different, more rushed. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. That's when the room went silent. My teacher didn't say a word. She just motioned for everyone to stay down and keep quiet. I could tell even she was nervous now. She kept checking her phone, and we could hear faint, distant police sirens outside. A few minutes passed. Then we heard something from the hallway. Footsteps, slow ones, not in a hurry like a cop or a teacher. Just one person walking. They stopped right in front of our classroom. We were all staring at the door. Nobody breathed. Then came a knock. Not loud, just a soft, slow knock 3 times. Nobody moved. Then the doorknob turned. They tried to open it, but it was locked, obviously. But they kept trying, not aggressively, just turning the handle back and forth like they were checking. Then a male voice on the other side said, "This is just a drill. You can open the door now." We all collectively looked at Mrs. Chen. She looked back at all of us, put her finger to her lips, and shook her head no. The person on the other side of the door kept knocking and trying the doorknob, and eventually, the knocks got more aggressive as the voice of the man kept saying hello. Our classroom was on the first floor in the science wing. I can't tell you how much I was shaking in my shoes. I know, even if all the other kids didn't want to admit it, they were too. Eventually, the knocking stopped, and the man must have walked away. We heard nothing after that for a solid 5 minutes. Total silence, apart from the police sirens outside getting louder. It felt like forever. Then someone down the hall screamed. It was a girl. Just one scream, then nothing. A couple of people in my class started crying quietly. Honestly, it was the girls. Someone whispered that they saw a shadow move past the little glass window on the classroom door on several occasions. Each time anyone spoke, even quietly, Mrs. Chen gave a stern but quiet shush. Another 5 or 10 minutes passed. Then, finally, we heard the sound of police officers shouting from down the hallway, telling everyone to stay in place. They were going room to room. When they finally knocked on our door and unlocked it with a key, Mrs. Chen didn't even move until they showed their badges. We were all escorted out in a line, past other classes doing the same thing. There were cop cars everywhere outside, even a SWAT van. I didn't see anything too crazy, but I did see one officer leading a guy in cuffs out of the building. He looked about 30, not a student, pale, long hair, wearing dark clothes. Later that day, we found out that some criminal had slipped into the school through one of the side doors during a delivery. That side door was right by the end of the science wing. Apparently, he was mentally unstable and had something in his backpack, but I don't know if it was a weapon or not. They didn't tell us much. They just said nobody was hurt and everything was under control. But I swear I'll never forget that knock at the door. The way he turned the handle, the scream down the hall, it didn't feel like everything was under control at all. I had just started school, and I already had a lockdown to tell about. I'm only 15 years old and just started as a sophomore at Northside High School in Jacksonville, North Carolina. That morning, I came to school early, around 6:50, 5 in the morning. I was one of the first people in my first period class, which was chorus. Our classroom is at the very end of the fine arts hallway right next to the auditorium. I was sitting at my seat with my phone out, listening to music, and just waiting for the bell to ring to start the day. After a few minutes, I heard my teacher say something, so I paused my music and took out my headphones. When I looked up, I saw my classmates heading into the closet at the back of the choir room. I was confused. We had just practiced a lockdown drill the day before, so I wasn't sure if this was another drill or something else. Still, I listened to what the teacher was saying and followed everyone else into the closet. The teacher shut the door behind us and turned off the lights. We were now sitting in complete darkness, with only a small amount of light coming in from under the door. At this point, I still didn't know what was happening, but then I heard police sirens outside. That's when I started to realize this wasn't a drill. It was real. I started to feel nervous, but I kept calm. I figured if I stayed as composed as I could, maybe I wouldn't panic as much. I sat in that closet quietly, trying to listen for any sounds coming from outside, but I didn't hear anything else. We stayed in that closet with the lights off until the lockdown ended around 8:40, 5 in the morning. That's nearly 2 hours. Once we were let out, I felt calm again, because everyone around me had stayed calm too. I went back to my seat in the front of the room and put my music back on, just trying to get back to normal. Later on, I decided to ask my teacher what had happened. I said, "Were there any fights today?" The teacher looked at me seriously and said, "It's much worse." That's when I started to realize something serious had really gone down. I looked out the window and saw cars lined up in the back of the school. At first, I thought it was just regular pickup traffic, but it felt different. In the classroom, some students were trying to get information. Eventually, my friend Jacob told me that someone had been stabbed in the middle of the school in the rotunda. I didn't know much more than that at the time, but shortly after, my mom texted me, asking if I was okay. I told her I was safe and still in my choir class. Some girls in the class had started crying after the lockdown, and that made everything feel even more real. My mom called me next. She told me she had parked her car at the baseball field, along with a bunch of other worried parents trying to find their kids. Eventually, my name was called, and I was allowed to leave the school. When I got to the field, I found my mom. She was clearly shaken up, and honestly, so was I. She drove me to the daycare where she worked, and once we got there, both of us went into a quiet room where we cried together. Her co-workers came in to try to comfort us, and I had to go outside to calm down even more. I put my headphones back in and listened to 3 Days Grace just to get my head right again. Later on, we found out exactly what happened. 2 students had been taken to the hospital. One of them died. A teacher had also been slashed by the attacker. In total, 3 people had been hurt that day. I started searching for more information and found the press conference about the incident already posted online. After watching it, my mom took me to Arby's to get something to eat. I hadn't eaten all day. We got our food, then went to pick up my younger brother from his middle school. He told us he had noticed a lot of cops at the school, but didn't know what had happened. When we got home, I kept searching online for updates. That's when I saw that a 16-year-old had already been charged with voluntary manslaughter, assault with a deadly weapon, and a list of other serious charges. 2 more students, 15 and 16, were also charged with assault and disorderly conduct. What made it even more disturbing was that someone had recorded the stabbing and posted the video on Snapchat. I didn't watch the video myself, but my mom told me about it. She said in the video, the person recording was running, so the phone was pointed at the ground, but you could clearly hear the screams of kids as the stabbing happened. My mom thinks the whole thing might have been gang-related. After I heard that, I was scared. Scared that someone might come back to retaliate. Another attack, more violence. It's hard to believe that someone actually died. I didn't even know the kid, but I've been thinking about him ever since. I hope he rests in peace.